Today, for our Experts in Emotion interview, we'll be speaking with Dr. Barbara Fredrickson on positive emotion. So Dr. Fredrickson is a distinguished professor of psychology and director of the Positive Emotions and Psychophysiology Lab at the University of North Carolina. She's a leading scholar studying positive emotions and human flourishing, and her research on positive emotions and lifestyle change is funded by the U.S. National Institutes of Health. Dr. Fredrickson has published more than 100 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters, and with the publication of Positivity in 2009 and Love 2.0 in 2013, she's written about her research for general audiences as well. Dr. Fredrickson's contributions have been recognized with numerous honors, including the American Psychological Association's Templeton Prize in Positive Psychology and the Society of Experimental Psychology's Career Trajectory Award. So I now turn to a very special Experts in Emotion interview together with Dr. Barbara Fredrickson from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So welcome, Barb. Thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Good to be here.
I thought what might be a fun way to kick this off is by asking you a little bit about what first got you interested in emotion.
Yeah, that's a great question. When I started in graduate school, there was really hardly any work on emotions. And ironically, I looked back at the first project that I was involved in as a first-year student in college, and it was somebody doing their senior thesis on emotions. And I remember thinking, what are emotions? How could, it was just that confusing to me. And even as I was part of the very first cohort of the NIMH Emotion Postdoc program that Richard Lazarus and Paul Ekman put together at the time, and we had a year-long seminar on emotions, and I think I was still halfway through that thinking, and what are we talking about? You kind of had this sense, there's something important here, but there was so little science on it beyond face expressions, and a little bit of stress and coping. So there really wasn't a fleshed out view of it. And, that actually might have a lot to do with the sort of stoic upbringing I had as a family where nobody talked about emotions. So, maybe I was coming at it very much from the outsider's perspective. But I very much only came to understand emotions from an academic angle, and then I feel like I became more fully human after understanding more about emotions. I didn't come from it being fully human first.
And so by studying emotions, you become actualized in some way, right, as a human being?
I feel like that's been my own personal path.
So what I'd like to ask you a little bit is just about the really groundbreaking work you've done in this area, especially on positive emotions. So, you're known widely for this pioneering work and really delineating the functional significance of positive emotions. You've published numerous articles and you have several major books, Love 2.0 and Positivity. And in particular, what I wanted to talk with you about today is your theory, the broaden and build theory of positive emotions. And I wonder if you could just say a little bit more of sort of what are the central principles behind this model?
Right. The broaden and build theory first emerged from a puzzle, an intellectual puzzle of trying to understand how emotions evolved. And at the time when I got on the scene, the main story about how emotions evolved all hinged on the idea of specific action tendencies that, kind of a fight or flight response, that emotions get you to do what's going to save your skin in that moment. And the kinds of things that had been identified for the positive emotions really were not specific and often not actions. So this sort of keystone concept that was our way of understanding why emotions evolved just didn't fit at all for the positive emotions. And so when I was doing my postdoc with Bob Levinson at UC Berkeley, I started working on an idea that he had, which he had written about casually in a chapter before then. And I thought, that's interesting. I want to study that thing. And his prediction was that, well, maybe positive emotions don't have their own physiological signature or really kind of thing that they're trying to do to the body or get you to do, but maybe they'll undo negative emotions. And so that's where I started with Bob in Bob's lab, working on tests of this undoing effect of positive emotions. I presented it at a major emotions conference a couple years later and got a lot of heat for saying that undoing was the function of positive emotions. And that kind of sent me back to the drawing board to read everything I could on evolutionary perspectives, how to make a proper evolutionary argument. And I decided in the end that undoing is not a function of positive emotions. Undoing is a byproduct of more direct function, which are really, it comes in two phases, broaden and build, which happen on very different timescales from each other. Broadening is what positive emotions do in the moment. They literally change the way your brain works, allowing you to take in more information. Your peripheral vision expands. You're more creative. You can connect the dots to see the bigger picture. That's a momentary cognitive change that occurs while you're experiencing a positive emotion. Now, the other part of the theory is the so what. Why does that matter? How could this save your skin? And the key is that it doesn't save your skin in the same way that negative emotions might have led to a quick and decisive action that would get you away from the predator. A positive emotion, that broadened mindset, experienced frequently, allows your resources to accumulate and compound and puts you on a positive trajectory of growth. So the key is, the reason positive emotions were adaptive for our ancestors is that by repeated experiences of positive emotions, we built up more social support, more resilience, better environmental knowledge, better physical health. That's where most of our work is going these days. And that you basically become a more resourceful, better version of yourself in a way that allows you to address future threats and future challenges. So the benefit of positive emotions isn't in the moment that you experience them. The benefit of them is having them as a steady diet over time, so that you can grow and become a more resilient, resourceful person over time. So broaden and build as a process isn't one thing. There's broadening that happens in the moment, building that happens over time. But together it kind of forms this upward spiral that puts people on a positive trajectory of growth.
So what do you see as some of the most central, empirical findings that have flowed from this model?
I think in my lab, we've done some interesting studies on how positive emotions broaden awareness, but my favorite studies on broadening awareness come from other people's labs. Particularly like the work that Adam Anderson has done, where he's shown that at very early stages of encoding, people are seeing more of their peripheral vision is expanded, and that's happening at, it's not something that people report on later. It's really happening at an intake level that people, when they're feeling good, it's like they can't help but take in more of the contextual surrounding information. And it's like the doors of perception are opened up, and people take in, there's sponges for contextual information. And I like how his lab has also shown that that more open visual perception leads to more verbal creativity. So going across domains, you see a connection between different kinds of broadening. And I've also collaborated with a kinesiologist, and we've looked at how emotion is conveyed in body movement, and we find that there's broadening in the torso too.
Wow.
That with positive, people's torsos expand in ways that reflect the way their mind is expanded, and their visions of their social relationships are expanded. So this broadened awareness, or this expansive way of being in the world, is something that comes through in comportment and is embodied as well. So those are some of the things that I think are exciting on the broadening side. On the building side, I have to say the thing that I'm most excited about right now is working on changes in gene expression in the immune system, and we're doing a large-scale study where we're teaching people different skills for self-generating positive emotions and drawing blood before and after, and then at long-term follow-up to see if we can see changes in gene expression that track their efforts to experience more positive emotion in daily life.
It's fascinating. I'm
So
really excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, that's we've got some cross-sectional data that are very suggestive. The longitudinal data are coming in soon.
Wow. So one thing I always wonder, I mean, I love your model. It's so beautiful and elegant. And having come from a discrete emotions perspective, myself, I wonder to what extent you think this model applies equivalently across states that range from, pride, very self-focused, to gratitude, very other-focused, or just reward-related feelings of enthusiasm and joy. Do we know this at this point?
We really don't know this at this point. The data are murky. In my own studies, we measure, I come from a discrete emotions perspective too, and we measure people's self-reports of 10 different discrete positive emotions. And so far, we find no distinctions between them. We find that our interventions, which are specifically around kindness, love, and compassion, they raise all the positive emotions together. Even pride, even interest. That could mean that people's self-reports are just completely not fine-tuned enough to pick things up. Or it could mean that people co-experience these, that positive emotions are experienced as in very overlapping, blended capacities. It could be that the way people conceptualize them. I'm also, currently very influenced by Lisa Feldman Barrett, Kristen Lindquist's views on how conceptualization matters, especially now that I'm offering a new conceptualization of love and how people seem to react to that when they say, oh, I never thought about love that way. And then they start experiencing it a little bit differently. So it's not like, I don't think the kinds of data that I've collected can actually say anything about whether emotions are discrete or not in terms of the way that debate has been going on in terms of are there discrete brain circuits. Discreteness doesn't always seem to be honored in people's self-reports of their experience. And actually, I sat down with Lisa Feldman Barrett some time ago, and she said, yeah, I was thinking about how my work might relate to yours. And she and I both kind of scratched our heads and said, they don't. Neither one contradicts the other. So I think that's a great way to push the field further, is to really try to understand where are the boundaries between those two, and where does it matter and where doesn't it matter.
One thing you alluded to in your response that I wanted to ask you more about that I think is so interesting is this work you've done on interventions. So really conducting these important, translational approaches that look at how we can cultivate positive emotion. And I know you've done this among individuals even suffering, from severe mental disorders like schizophrenia. And so I wondered if you could say a little bit more about the promise of this as a potential, intervention towards building and cultivating positivity.
Right. What's interesting about it is that I never thought I was doing translational research or developing interventions. It's just that the size and shape of the build hypothesis in the broaden and build theory, you can only test it if you look at, well, what happens if someone's daily diet increases over time? How do they change over time? And so to test that got me into a zone that looks like interventions and has kicked up some interventions, most certainly. And we've worked particularly with actually, when I first started trying to test this part of the theory, I had a number of failed interventions. And then I realized I didn't need to recreate the wheel and build one on my own. I came across this ancient technique of meditation called loving kindness meditation. and realized, a big light bulb went off, and I thought I could use that to test my theory. So I wasn't really doing research on meditation. I was doing research on emotions using meditation, but it certainly points out the power of mind training as a way to learn how to regulate one's emotions. One of my colleagues here, David Penn, works on schizophrenia, and he heard me give a talk and saw that one of our findings with our normal subjects was that learning loving kindness meditation helped people anticipate or savor future positive events, which is, as you know from Anne Kring's work, very much at issue with schizophrenia and especially the negative symptoms of schizophrenia. So we ran a number of groups where we taught the same exact class that we have taught to healthy community members, to community dwelling schizophrenics with negative symptoms. And one of the most surprising things is that these people were selected for their negative symptoms, which means they don't feel like they're not very motivated. They don't want to be social. They don't really talk about emotions. We almost had perfect attendance.
Wow.
So the huge thing in and of itself is that they kept coming back, really liked learning this new skill. And we found that on self-reports, their negative symptomatology was improved. So it seems to be holding some promise to kind of wake up the positive emotion system, kind of take it off the floor and raise it. And I think that could be useful in a number of different clinical disorders. I'm starting to collaborate with another clinician where we'll look at the effects of loving kindness meditation on social anxiety. So, as a social psychologist, I do all the clinical work in collaboration with people who are better trained for dealing with diverse populations. But I'm really excited to see those applications come into test.
I mean, it's amazing research, and it's very timely and much needed. And the fact that you're saying you're getting these results with some of, when we think of psychiatric disorders, the most severe and chronic of them all, schizophrenia, I mean, that's just so promising. And it makes me wonder, to what extent we can think about this as a potential transdiagnostic type of intervention, to optimize mental health more broadly across populations. I know you're looking at social anxiety disorder. And so I wonder to what extent you think we might be cultivating some critical ingredients here therapeutically that we can apply broadly.
Right. Well, my take from the theory is that positive emotions help us become better versions of ourselves. I'm mostly testing it with healthy, adults, and that goes transdiagnoses. And so I don't think that would be any different when you go into the clinical domain, since affective dysregulation is so prominent across so many different diagnoses that I think that this is one that holds particular promise.
So having talked a bit about just how you got started in emotion, the really foundational work you've done in positive emotion from this basic science perspective, building one of the most integral models we have to date, and then now looking at intervention research, I wonder, as you think about the path that you've come through this far, where do you think you see the future of the field headed from this point forward?
Yeah, I think that it's going to be more and more critical for emotion researchers, and this is happening already, but to work in team science with chemists and genetic experts and imaging experts, and see how far we can understand the physical and community effects of emotions. I think that, I'm originally trained as an experimental social psychologist, and our kind of bread and butter studies are small laboratory studies, one-time tests, and I think that we're ready to take that out to larger, bigger time scales, deeper into the body, and we can't do that as individual labs. This needs to be done as kind of big team science. So I see that as something that we should all be heading towards as at least part of what we do. I mean, I think there'll still always be a place for one-time laboratory studies, to test ideas out, but to take it to a larger scale course, this depends on funding and things like that, but I think that's going to be a really important funding priority too.
And then related, I mean, when you have students come to you asking you for advice who are thinking about embarking in this field, what do you typically tell them?
You know, I think that everybody needs to find a part of the field that they're absolutely passionate about, because I mean, being an academic is a tough job, and the payoffs in terms of, you know, when you get publications or good news is few and far between. So you need to be fueled by your own passion, and there are tons of great questions out there. And just find the one that you want to work on and dig in. And don't worry if it doesn't pay off right away. There are a lot of people who have very slow career starts. I was one of them. Sometimes it just takes a while to get it going.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with us today. It's been wonderful.
Okay, thanks. Good to be here.
So this concludes our Experts in Emotion interview with Dr. Barbara Fredrickson from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Thank you again, Barbara. Great.